government. We hear this word daily, but do we really understand what it means? We hear words like dictator, demagogue, and king thrown around, and we hear politicians describe other politicians' goals as those that benefit the aristocracy or as those who would turn America into socialism. What does it all mean? In this video, we're going to take a look at different governments across the globe. According to dictionary.com, government is the political direction and control exercised over the actions of its members, citizens, and inhabitants of communities, societies, and states. The direction of affairs of a state, community, etc. Political administration. Whoever has the power to control the state makes up its government. But that still leads to more questions like who has the power and who determines who gets to hold the power and how many should hold the power. Hence, we gotta discuss forms of government. To begin, we'll look at the most conservative forms of government and move our way to the left to the more liberal forms of government. And just to be clear, in this video, conservative is going to mean more authoritarian and liberal is going to mean the spread of equality across the masses. Fascism, totalitarianism, and North Korea-style dictatorship. I'm going to lump all these different types of government together because there really isn't much difference between them as it pertains to who holds the power and the efforts that they make to keep it. The word totalitarian implies that there is total power belonging to one person or the state, which is usually governed by one person in these forms of government. Fascists place huge emphasis on nationalism. We're not talking patriotism or pride, but more extreme. Nazis wanted to kill Jews, Poles, Gypsies, homosexuals, and anyone who wasn't culturally or racially and politically the same as a pure German. North Korea is the same. There are practically no people of non-Korean origin in North Korea. If you don't adhere strongly to the state, or if you are caught committing a crime such as watching smuggled movies or speaking out against the government or not reporting such behavior, your entire family could find themselves suffering for up to 3 generations of imprisonment on a work camp. These displays of power instill fear in its subjects, and they also attempt to do one other thing that any authoritarian regime must do in order to keep its power. They gotta prevent that change, that progress. The more conservative a country is, the more threatened they are about any and all change, because anything that helps their subjects is a threat to the state's absolute power. Kim Jong-un recently had one of his top commanders executed by being blown up with an anti-aircraft gun. His crime? Falling asleep in a meeting. Our leaders do this pretty regularly, by the way. Theocracy is also a super conservative form of government. Historically, theocracies are going to be governments where all the people believed that their leader was a god, such as with the Egyptian pharaohs. But today, we think about theocracy as a form of government led by religious officials. In other words, the complete absence of the separation of church and state. Iran is probably the best example of a modern theocracy. The leader is not the prime minister, but a dude called the Ayatollah, which is a Shia religious leader. This guy, who is at the time of this video is called Sayyid Ali Hashemi Khomeini, calls the shots in Iran. He tends to be more behind the scenes, but holds on to the power nonetheless. The Vatican is also considered a theocracy because it's governed by the Pope, who has his own private army known as the Swiss Guard. Monarchies are also about as far right on the left-right spectrum as theocracy. And we also have kingdoms in 2017. Saudi Arabia is the best example that you should know before all the others because it is an absolute monarchy like the Middle Ages, man. It's a leading power in the Middle East and also is one of the most important allies in the Middle East. While there are many monarchies still in existence, they are constitutional monarchies and are usually more democratic than a traditional monarchy. Monarchies are not as far right conservative as totalitarian governments like North Korea simply because they don't actually rule with absolute power. Rather, they gotta find a way to find balance between the power that they share with the aristocracy. Historically, kings like Louis XIV of France were very able to strike up a favorable balance, but if you study the history behind that, you'll learn that it wasn't easy for him either. And he lived much of his life in fear of the aristocracy. The king of Saudi Arabia is King Salman, and many of his local level leaders are members of his family or close friends of the family. The last of your more conservative right forms of government before we move on to the liberal left that we're going to discuss is going to be the one-party oligarchical government such as Russia and China. While there is much emphasis on maintaining power and control over their subjects, there is also opportunities for their subjects in these types of government. China's Western urban population is in many ways comparable to Western developed countries. At the end of the day, however, these countries will do anything to exert their power over their subjects and the regions where they dominate. Currently, Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, has controlled his party since 2000. While there is political opposition to his power, many of his opponents mysteriously die. Putin has made himself into a symbol of Russian pride, and strikingly, despite a bad economy caused by bad management, plummeting oil prices, and imposed sanctions for doing things like invading nearby countries, he maintains unbelievably high approval ratings like any other world leader has only dreamed to have. Recently, in order to continue to exert his power on the world scene, he directly interfered with the United States democracy by working to hack the DNC and to publicize fake news in order to help Donald Trump get elected. China is also very similar. China has lately been working tirelessly to impose power over the entire South China Sea, making land claims that challenge other powers in the region, such as Japan. As conservative governments, both of these countries are strong advocates for other countries' sovereignty, and they side with governments on retaining power at all costs. Thus, in the Syrian civil war, they support Syria's government strongly. So far, we've looked at the textbook examples of some of the most conservative forms of government. They try hard to resist any change in favor of the masses because changes such as freedom of religion, rights to education, equality, and prosperity means power taken from authority. Now, let's look at a form of government that most of us are pretty familiar with: Republican democracy. Republican, or representative democracy, is a form of government that exists pretty much on the line between your conservative right and your liberal left. Since its position is in the center of the left-right spectrum, people are going to call it the center of the different forms of government. Representative democracy is centered on the notion that the educated masses should have a say in the politics that govern them. The Enlightenment of the 1700s began in France, when a group of middle-class intellectuals known as the bourgeoisie decided that they should be on equal footing with the aristocracy and the clergy, who made up a tiny percentage of the total French population, but controlled almost all the land and wealth. The movement spawned revolutions all over the world, bent on protecting and upholding the rights of the informed, who could elect representatives to make legislation on the behalf of those who elected them. This is why education in Western countries is so important. The US is a standard for representative democracy, but basically any Western European country would qualify as a representative democracy. When we vote for leaders, we vote for them based on how they stand for and against the things that matter to us most on social and economic issues. If we don't like the job that they did, we replace them in the next election cycle. Now I know what you're thinking. The Greeks had democracy during the height of their civilization, and you'd be right, to a point. Athens was the cultural center point of the Greek civilization, and they practiced direct democracy, that is, ruled by people who would individually participate in government by voting. Direct democracy is different than Republican democracy, and would even be a more liberal form of government in theory, because it means more individual freedoms for each person within the country. When it comes to practice, there are several things you need to consider when comparing what they did to what the United States does now. Could you imagine how difficult it would be for all 320 million Americans to show up to Washington, D.C. and vote for individual pieces of legislation or for the president? Direct democracy simply can't work in a geographic area as vast as the United States. And secondly, Athens' democracy really wasn't a democracy as much as it was an aristocracy, which is more of a conservative form of government, where rich people control and hold all the power. Because of the restrictions regarding who was eligible to vote, only the richest Athenians were able to vote and hold office. Today, you hear politicians on the left accuse conservatives of our country of wanting to create an aristocracy as an insult, insinuating that they only care about legislation that benefits the richest of the rich, and the government can be bought and influenced by the rich. Still, many of the principles of Greek direct democracy do apply to our brand of Republican democracy. Before we go any further left, I want to remind everyone that liberal in the context of this video means more equality for individuals across the board. In your most conservative forms of government, there exist certain dichotomies between those who have power and those who don't. For instance, Hitler believed that he and the pure race of the German people had superiority to literally everyone else. In North Korea, if you worked for the state and lived in Pyongyang, you have elevated status. But forms of government such as direct democracy and socialism are designed, in theory, to level these divisions and promote equality among the masses. The idea is more individual freedom that is enjoyed by everyone, the more everyone will benefit from those freedoms. Socialism is next on our list. In America, words like socialism scare the sweet bejesus out of us because we automatically associate with the complete redistribution of wealth and resources and punishment for working hard and getting ahead. In the Democratic primaries leading up to the 2016 presidential election, Senator Bernie Sanders freaked everybody out by throwing around words like democratic socialism. He was suggesting that the government should help the lower and middle class by paying higher education and higher minimum wages and other programs that are designed to benefit the majority of people. This form of socialism is put into practice in places such as Scandinavian countries of Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. The reason that the word socialism invokes such fear and discontent in the US is largely because of its association with historical dictatorships like Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany, as well as modern Russia and China. In short, democratic socialism, seen in places like Sweden, promote opportunity for anyone and everyone to find success on their own, despite where they were born and what they were born into. They have free access to the country's world-renowned education system. But in places such as Russia and China, governments have used the ideals of social equality to restrict the rights of its citizens against the government, justifying things like state censorship and killing its own people with the logic that what's best for the state as a whole is best for individuals living there. We fear socialism in the United States mainly because we fear socialism coupled with corrupt political system that stymies our efforts to find individual success. A far cry from what we see happening in Scandinavia. Communism, then, is what Karl Marx considered the ultimate goal in a socialist economy, and is even further to the left. Communism today has meant the addition of a command economy on top of the freedom-suppressing governments of places such as Soviet Russia and China. Interestingly enough, on our political spectrum, Scandinavia socialism would be on the left of our center line, just to the left of the Republican democracy we have in the United States. But as discussed already in our video, China and Russia are on the far right. Fancy that. That just about sums it up when it comes to some of the most basic forms of government seen across the earth. Any further left and you'd have found yourselves in a genuine anarchy. The complete absence of government and the complete freedom of people to do whatever the heck they want to do with no regard to how anyone feels about it. Now that you know a little bit about the basics of the forms of government, I hope that you will think about it in the context of the news, the major political events, such as the tug of war between Russia and the US that has become so prevalent in the last 5 years or so. Thanks for hanging out with me. If you want to support my channel, click on the link in the description and become a patron. Or just like and share my videos with other students and teachers who can benefit from the content. Of course, subscribe to Professor Dustin and look out for the next geography content video. Peace out, students.